Okay, it's time for the last video in my Macbeth series. So now this is going to be scene 7, and some versions have, this is all scene 7, and some versions divided into two scenes, scene 7 and 8. It doesn't make that much of a difference, but in any case. So, remember, Macbeth has emptied his castle, there's fighting on the plains, the flat ground in front of the castle, and it's quite a violent scene. And Macbeth says, "They have tied me to a stake, I cannot fly, but bear-like I must fight to the course." So in Macbeth's day, they would stake a bear to the ground and set the dogs on it, and he equates himself with the bear in that situation. Now, oddly enough, he still remains confident that he's going to win. He's outnumbered. He's fighting in front of his castle, but he still believes that somehow he's going to come out of this thing unscathed. He says, "What's he that not born of woman? Such a one am I to fear, or none." So he still believes the prophecy that none of woman born shall harm Macbeth, even though Birnam Wood has come to Dunsinane already. But he still seems to think that he's invincible, as Hecate said he would. And he is confronted by young Siward. So young Siward finds Macbeth and challenges him to single combat. And he asks who he's facing, and Macbeth says, "My name's Macbeth." Young Siward said, "The devil himself could not pronounce a title more hateful to mine ear." Right, so he's saying, I hate you and I'm going to kill you. And Macbeth says, "No, nor more fearful." Now, young Siward has been training for this his whole life, right? This is his first big battle, but he is, reasonably good at it. Since as a young noble, he would be trained as a knight, and this is his first test. And he's so confident in God too. He says, Macbeth says that his name would be fearful to young Siward. He says, "Thou liest, abhorred tyrant. With my sword I'll prove the lie thou speakst." So he's confident that he's going to win because he is just and in the right. Now, it says they fight and young Siward is slain. So it doesn't take long. Macbeth, toys them a little bit and then just kills him. So Macbeth is still confident that he come out of this thing, and he's also still the best warrior in Scotland. And so combined with his skill and his confidence, he easily kills young Siward. Now, then Macduff enters the scene, and Macbeth exits the scene having killed young Siward, and Macduff enters, and he's looking around desperately to find Macbeth, and he says, "Tyrant, show thy face. If thou be slain and with no stroke of mine, my wife and children's ghosts will haunt me still." So he believes that as he must be the one who kills Macbeth, and as the nemesis in the play, that's likely to be the case. But in this case, he is not. He hasn't fought anyone to this point. He says, "I cannot strike at wretched kerns whose arms are hired to bear their staves." Right? So this tells us that Macbeth's army is made up of kerns. Right? And as if you may recall, or you may not recall, that at the beginning of the play, MacDonald, who was a traitor and a rebel, his army was made up of kerns and gallowglasses. So the only people that are fighting for Macbeth are people who he has hired to fight for him. And Macduff isn't going to lower himself to fight them. He says, "Either thou, Macbeth, or else my sword with an unbattered edge I sheathe again undeeded." So undeeded meaning having done with no deeds on it. So he has no intention of fighting anyone unless it be Macbeth. In any case, enter Malcolm and old Siward, and they realize that in fact the army of Macbeth has for the most part abandoned him, and they're surprised. "We have met with foes that strike beside us," which means they're actually going to turn and fight with them instead of fighting against them, which is sort of an odd thing. Anyway, so basically the battle is, for all intents and purposes, over fairly quickly. with the exception, of course, of Macbeth, who has not given up. And then, so the final scene, enter Macbeth, and he says, "Why should I play the Roman fool and die on mine own sword?" So a lot of Roman generals, when they had been defeated, would kill themselves by falling on their own swords. He says, "Well, I see lives, the gashes do better upon them. So I'd rather cut holes in other people than myself." And then Macduff enters, and typically he enters, and Macbeth has his back to him, and he says, "Turn, hellhound." Now Macbeth doesn't want to fight Macduff. He says, "Of all men else I have avoided thee." Right? So obviously he's sort of seen him off in the distance on the battlefield and gone to fight somewhere else, so he doesn't have to fight Macduff. Not because he's afraid of him, but he doesn't want to kill him too. He says, "But get thee back, my soul is too much charged with blood of thine already." And he's saying essentially that when I die and God calls me to account for the things that I've done, I've already got the deaths of your family on my soul. Please don't make me put yours on there too. He's fairly confident that whatever happens, he's going to kill Macduff, and he's essentially saying, "I don't want that on my soul." Well, Macduff says very little. "I have no words. My voice is in my sword, thou bloodier villain, than terms can give thee out." And then they fight. And, for the first part of it, Macbeth is doing quite well. He says, "Let fall thy blade on vulnerable crests, I bear a charmed life." So essentially that you can't kill me, so, give it up. And he says, "I bear a charmed life which must not yield to one of woman born." So I can't be killed by anybody who has a mother. And of course, Macduff understands the nature of the equivocation better than Macbeth himself does, and says, "Let the angel whom thou hast served tell thee Macduff was from his mother's womb untimely ripped." Right? So let the angel whom thou hast served, I assume is Satan, let Satan fill you in that I was in fact torn from my mother's womb. And now you'll see in the notes, generally it says that he was born by cesarean birth. Now my guess is probably in that day and age, it was less a cesarean and more of simply someone cutting her open and taking him out. I doubt his mother survived it. But in any case, he wasn't born, right? It says, "None of woman born shall harm Macbeth." Well, he wasn't technically born. He came out, but he wasn't born. And so Macbeth has focused on the mother part, and the witches knew he would, when in fact the born part is a more interesting aspect of that. Anyway, so Macbeth realizes, of course, he's completely outdone, right? He's been had, and he says, "Accursed be the tongue that tells me so, for it hath cowed my better part of man. And be these juggling fiends no more believe that palter with us in a double sense." So he's no longer going to believe in the witches. Well, he should have given that some thought a long time ago. But in any case, this double talk that they've been guilty of has clearly led me down the garden path. And he says, "I'll not fight with thee." And so Macduff says, "Then yield thee, coward, and live to be the show and gaze of the time. We'll have thee, as our rarer monsters are, painted upon a pole, and under writ, here may you see the tyrant." So, yeah, okay, give up, and you'll be humiliated properly as any criminal should. And of course, Macbeth isn't having any of that. He says, "I will not yield to kiss the ground before young Malcolm's feet, and to be baited with the rabble's curse. Though Birnam would become to Dunsinane, and thou opposed, being of no woman born, yet I will try the last." So he says, well, I'm not going to be humiliated. I'm going to fight on. "Before my body I throw my warlike shield." Right? So, and a lot of people, you'll see them, in a lot of editions, you'll see him throw his shield away. But what he really means is, "Before my body I throw my warlike shield," is I'm going to put my shield up in front of my body. And then he says, the iconic line, "Lay on, Macduff, and damned be him that first cries, hold, enough." So he's saying, that let's go, let's fight, and whoever taps out, well, they can go to hell. In any case, they exit the scene. They fight very hard, and they exit the scene. Now, then Malcolm enters the scene, realizing that, of course, this, for all intents and purposes, the battle is over, and Ross, the perennial news gatherer, comes in with information that to tell Seward, who is with them, that his son has been killed. And Seward takes it all in stride, basically knowing that, as a warrior, and Seward is he says that they described him earlier as an older and a better soldier, none that Christendom gives out. So he's one of the better warriors, and he's an old man, and he's an old soldier. He's been in many campaigns, and he knows how it happens. And so he says that had I as many sons as I have hairs, I would not wish them to a fairer death. So because Ross has told him that in fact his son has been wounded on the front. So he was facing his enemy when he died, and that is the best that a warrior can hope for. And so Malcolm says that he'll perhaps mourn him a little more than Seward does, but and then Macduff enters. Now typically in the scene, Macduff is carrying Macbeth's head. In a really good addition to this play, someone will have made up a head and he'll be carrying it, or sometimes it's just a cloth sack with a lot of blood on it. In any case, it's supposed to represent Macbeth's head. So, but in any case, Macduff informs Malcolm that he is the king, and he says, "Behold, where stands the usurper's cursed head. I see thee compassed with thy kingdom's pearl." Right, and the pearl is the best part of your kingdom, which is all of the finest nobles are around you. "I speak that my salutations in their minds, whose voices I desire aloud with mine. Hail, King of Scotland!" And they all shout, "Hail, King of Scotland!" And Malcolm gets the last laugh, but he also gets the last word in the play, where he discusses what's going to happen in the future. He says, "We shall not spend a large expense of time before we reckon with your several loves and make us even with you." So he said, we're gonna get right down to business, and where he says, "Make us even with you," us being the royal we, right? So he's talking about himself, and what he's suggesting here is that he right now places himself below them because their service to him has been so great, and so his intention now is to reward them in a way that will bring him some honor, that to equal theirs. And then he says they're going to tidy up Scotland. Right? "What's more to do, which would be planted newly with the time, as calling home our exiled friends abroad that fled the snares of watchful tyranny." So Macbeth's people have terrified people and have gone around, torturing people and making them afraid, and a lot of people have fled Scotland, and he's going to call them back. Okay, "producing forth the cruel ministers of this dead butcher and his fiend-like queen." Right? So he's going to, those people who were loyal to Macbeth and did his bidding, meaning, torturing and killing people and collecting exorbitant taxes and all of those other things that he's probably done. Those people are going to be caught and I assume hung. And then he says, when he describes Lady Macbeth, he says his fiend-like queen, who, as 'tis thought, by self and violent hands took off her life. So this is the first time we hear, although we suspected it, that in fact Lady Macbeth, having been tortured by the guilt of her own actions, has taken her own life. And then at that point he says, "So thanks to all at once, and to each one whom we invite to see us crowned at Scone." Now it looks like scone. Sometimes it looks like the biscuit that's called a scone, but typically it's pronounced Scone. Anyway, it's the place where the kings are invested with the kingship, and he invites everybody to be there with him to see him crowned. And the assumption, unlike Macbeth, is that they will all come. Anyway, everything is set right in Scotland. Presumably the land will flourish as it does when the rightful king is in his place, and that's all she wrote. So I hope these videos, if you watch them, haven't been too torturous for you, but I hope they help. Anyway, have a nice life.